Hey guys, Nate here. For everyone feeling the medical, psychological, and financial burden of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sending love your way. Stay strong. We're in this together. It's over, guys. DICE has pulled the plug on Battlefield 5. The last year and a half since Battlefield 5's release has been the darkest days in the history of the franchise. Today is going to be a video on what I believe the next Battlefield title needs to not only be successful. That wouldn't be enough. The next title has to literally pull our franchise from the darkest depths of hell. This is just my opinion, but I believe our beloved franchise, our community, our very way of life may be on the brink of extinction. The biggest reason I feel like Battlefield 5 failed was because it wasn't based in the modern era. It's literally been half a decade, if not longer, since the last modern-themed Battlefield title. A lot of us expected a return to the modern theater of war after Battlefield 1 being based in World War I. But then the trailer released, and it was like Battlefield 5 was over before it started. Perhaps DICE EA found out through various sources that Call of Duty was making a World War II game, which ended up being Call of Duty World War II in 2017. And they wanted a direct competitor to go head-to-toe with it. So they just made their minds up then and there that the next Battlefield title would be World War II themed. I can't help but wonder if DICE and EA are trying too hard to be like Call of Duty and win over their player base. This is just a theory of mine, but if this truly is the case, I would find this more infuriating than any of the worst schemes DICE and EA have tried to pull in the past, with pay-to-win microtransactions and all the rest of the BS they've tried to pull throughout the years. Because it ends up alienating the OG players that have been here since the beginning, the ones who have stuck together, even through the worst of it, all the memories we've made through the years, the inside jokes, memes, jargon, and terminology only the hardcore Battlefield players know, not anyone else in the industry. We are the bread and butter of the franchise. We are what keeps the wheel turning at the end of the day. In the end, it's a lose-lose situation for DICE and EA. If this is your strategy moving forward, because if you cannot even keep your own fan base happy, how are you going to please newcomers? Battlefield is unique and unlike any other franchise in the industry. We all know it. That classic Battlefield flavor. This is what makes it special. Like many other franchises, it may change little things here and there, but the core fundamentals of the franchise never change. What all this means is that DICE EA are essentially forcing us to compromise for a different genre almost as a result of their desperate attempts to ramp up sales by imitating other franchises that they notice finding success. This may work in the short term, but in the long term you are going to be worse off because you are changing the winning formula, a formula that runs like clockwork. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. DICE, where did you go wrong? I always saw you as the innovators, not the imitators. The second reason I believe Battlefield 5 failed is that the game was rushed. Who knows how great the game could have been if DICE had an extra year to develop the game. It could have been the best World War II game ever created. It is the same thing that almost killed Battlefield 4. The game was almost unplayable at launch, but DICE LA was somehow able to bring that game back from the dead. Third, I need to discuss aircraft to infantry balance. Battlefield never seems to get this right in any game, besides maybe Battlefield 1. Aircraft were always overpowered in Battlefield. After playing Battlefield 5, you might even call them nearly invincible. DICE needs to nerf aircraft, incentivize players for targeting aircraft by awarding more points for damaging them, give aircraft a longer recharge time on resupplying guns, missiles, bombs, countermeasures, and rockets. Do something. In Battlefield 5, tanks, not just aircraft, were also invincible. In past Battlefields, it was much easier to take out tanks as an engineer with anti-tank rockets and other gadgets. Battlefield 4 and 1 were the best at giving nearly each of the four classes adequate tools to fight off vehicles. Sure, engineer is always the go-to class for the anti-vehicle role, but in Battlefield 4 the recon and support had C4, so you could hold your own against vehicles with these classes as well. Battlefield 1 also did a fantastic job at giving all classes adequate anti-vehicle capabilities. For some reason, Battlefield 5 took not just a step back, but a Millennium Falcon lightspeed jump back in terms of infantry to vehicle balance. I want to pause for a minute and tell a cringy but inspiring story. One day in 2010, a voice-cracky 13-year-old COD noob who got the Modern Warfare 2 Edition Xbox 360 for Christmas the previous year was derping around on YouTube when all of a sudden he saw something out of the corner of his eye. He clicked on the video. It was multiplayer gameplay from Battlefield Bad Company 2. What he saw blew his mind. You could blow up walls, make buildings collapse, drive Abrams tanks and fly Apache gunships. And the bullets had bullet drop. They had realistic physics. They didn't just travel at the speed of light like many other shooters. Everything was a projectile. Nothing was hit scan. He was sold. He scrounged up whatever change he could find. He checked inside his old birthday cards he kept on his bookshelf, checked under all the pockets of all the pants and shorts he owned, all the pockets of his backpack and his wallet, hoping he would find a few stray crumpled up George Washingtons. He begged his mom to take him to GameStop. When he got back home with the fresh, shiny, glossy disc case, he sprinted down the stairs to get to his Xbox, except for the last few steps from the bottom, in which he opted to just jump the rest of the way down. He booted the game up and his world was rocked. Ever since that very day, Battlefield has pretty much been the only series I've played. Period. That's right, an ignorant teenage COD noob who had never heard of Battlefield was won over to a different franchise by one video of YouTube gameplay from a game of a different franchise. Those were the good old days. It was a simpler time. Back then, the world was safe and small. Our beloved community, our franchise, was at its peak with Battlefield 3. In my opinion, every title since has failed to live up to this game's greatness. Not just the less successful titles like Battlefield 5, but even the successful titles like Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1. In 2012, our community, DICE, Battlefield, was an unstoppable juggernaut. But then somewhere along the way, DICE lost their way. Perhaps some in the company fell victim to greed. Every title going back to Battlefield 4 has been one step forward, one step back. I can't help but wonder where the franchise would be today if DICE EA hadn't keep making the same and often simple mistakes since Battlefield 4. The reason Battlefield 3 was so great was because it stole all the good plays from Call of Duty's playbook, but was still just as much a true Battlefield sandbox game. It was the ultimate game that made no compromises, the best of both worlds. Battlefield and Call of Duty have always been arch rivals. Both are AAA juggernauts that slug it out every October and November, trying to find an edge anywhere they can as they fanatically try to boost quarterly earnings with each new annual release. For whatever reason, Battlefield never seems to quite match Call of Duty's success. There are several key reasons I'm about to explain as to why this may be. This is something I find puzzling because I truly believe the Frostbite engine that Battlefield games have used for over a decade now is the benchmark for visuals and physics in the gaming industry that all other developers have to strive to measure up against. This is the least of my worries when it comes to DICE checking all the boxes on the list for Battlefield 6. The gaming industry, the gaming community, the world is a better place when DICE is firing on all cylinders. That is just the truth. The Frostbite engine has been the pinnacle of game engines since the day it launched. It redefined the absolute engineering limits you could accomplish with game engine visuals and physics. It almost seems like it's getting so good you wonder how DICE can make it any better. Maybe DICE should pull resources away from the hardcore audio-visual engineering and allocate them to other aspects of the game that aren't nearly as refined, such as the gameplay and balance issues that always seem to hold the franchise back. On the contrary, I also understand that no matter how well engineered the visuals and physics of a game is, if the gameplay isn't fair and balanced, it is kind of all for nothing, and Call of Duty does a much better job than Battlefield at this. That is kind of the sad truth. Whatever the shortcomings of Battlefield Bad Company 2 were, the next game, Battlefield 3, capitalized on almost everything. The map design was the most balanced of any Battlefield title. The customization, which lagged far behind in Bad Company 2 as opposed to Call of Duty, was on par with Call of Duty in Battlefield 3. Soldiers could be customized with different camo. Weapons had 3 customization slots. The list goes on and on. One thing Call of Duty always gets right is marketing and hype. Whether it's Eminem or Metallica songs in the trailers, or Sam Worthington and Michael Rooker as character voices in the campaign. Battlefield 3 used this tactic in their trailers and campaign, and it is a big part of why the game was so successful. I highly recommend watching Jack Fragg's video, Battlefield 3, a hype and marketing masterpiece, and I will putting a link in the description. I believe the 4-class medic, engineer support, recon system in Battlefield is obsolete, and it needs to be more like Call of Duty. Is a game really a sandbox if you can't use an LMG with an RPG or carry 2 primary weapons? I think you understand where I'm going here. Also, Battlefield needs to adopt Call of Duty's system for varying mobility depending on what category of primary weapon you are currently using. Okay, enough criticizing. Now I'd like to talk about things I think Battlefield gets right, and ideas Battlefield can take from other games. The advancement of vehicle mechanics in Battlefield 5 should be here to stay. This is one of the few things Battlefield 5 got right. Not having unlimited ammo for tanks anymore, crouching while using HMG turrets, having an animation for entering and exiting, disabling tank guns, engines, and tracks, and damaging rudders on planes. These mechanics just add to the immersion and realism of the game. Battlefield's squad system is outdated and ancient, particularly the squad communication system, which prevents a meaningful communication network with the rest of the team. Being able to only talk to 3 or 4 other squad members severely takes away from the teamwork, social interaction, and immersion of the game. The PC game Squad, which has many similar gameplay aspects to Battlefield, has a fantastic team communication system, a massive improvement over Battlefield, and something we could all learn from. I will be putting a link in the description to Operator Drewski's video explaining how the game Squad works and its groundbreaking communication system. I could go on and on for hours explaining Squad, but for the sake of time, I'll just summarize what I saw from watching that video. The best way I can describe Squad is that it implements many of the same mechanics that were newly implemented in Battlefield 5, but in Squad they work 10 times as well. Fortifications, medic bags, ammo packs, and vehicle resupply stations. These are all features included in Squad, not just Battlefield 5. The main difference is that it takes much longer to acquire these items in Squad, and you have only a finite amount of each item. Some items require traveling all the way back to spawn base to resupply. If this was implemented in Battlefield, I feel it would bring more balance to the game, slow the game down, add a more tactical element of gameplay that the more hardcore player base would enjoy, and better add to the immersion and realism of that only in Battlefield flavor. How about implementing a damage system similar to Escape from Tarkov, where taking damage in the arms decreases accuracy, and taking damage in the legs hinders mobility? Vehicles must be completely balanced between factions. The US vehicles in Battlefield 3 and 4 had an unfair advantage, as their tanks and mobile AA were much faster. The rent-a-server system from Battlefield 4 needs to make a return in Battlefield 6. I know a lot of people in the Battlefield community want the next Battlefield to be multiplayer only. I understand what the advantages of going this route would be. A lot of Battlefields in the past have had really terrible campaigns like Battlefield 4 and 5. This is just wasting development resources that could have been used to make the multiplayer better. But there is also something to be said about having a solid campaign and or co-op mode as the foundation of your game, like the Zombies campaign and co-op modes have been for Call of Duty for over a decade now. The campaigns in Battlefield Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3 were very solid. I believe they are a good tool to use if you are a new player to the Battlefield franchise that you can use to learn the extremely complex mechanics of the game. I believe campaigns and co-op modes can almost be used as a tutorial in this sense for multiplayer. This is the situation I was in coming over to Battlefield Bad Company 2 after playing Call of Duty the last few years. I was able to get pretty comfortable with the vehicle mechanics among many other things. Regardless of how things turn out when Battlefield 6 comes around, having a training range like in Battlefield 4 should be a must-have on DICE's checklist. Battlefield 6 has to be a true sandbox. You cannot call your game a sandbox if it is lacking in content and customization, like Battlefield 5 is. I want to be able to create my own emblems and place them on my weapons and vehicles. I want to be able to drive an Abrams tank with a Punisher skull on the 50 cal turret shield, and put Decepticon logos on my stealth jets if that's what makes me happy. Maybe that's not your style, and instead you want a Pepe the Frog logo. Fine by me. A video game is supposed to be an escape from reality, a realm without bounds where you can feel free to express yourself. Many members of our community probably are disowning DICE right now, but you need to realize that there are plenty of people in the company that want the best for the Battlefield franchise, just like us. They're just coders, devs, and artists who have a job and need to pay their bills. They don't give orders, they take them, just like most of us. I'm not just going to sit back here and pretend that greed doesn't exist in the gaming industry. There's a lot of it to go around, and not just in DICE and EA. I highly suggest you click on the link in the description for episode 1342 of the Joe Rogan podcast featuring John Carmack. John Carmack is a computer programmer, video game developer, and engineer. He co-founded ID Software and was the lead programmer of its video games Commander, Keen, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake, Rage, and their sequels. Currently, he is the CTO at Oculus. This was a very eye-opening episode for me, and there was a lot I took away from listening to that episode, including what amazing insight Carmack had to the gaming industry.
How did you feel about when people would play the game competitively and they would turn all the textures off?
That especially is a sore point with the artists that have labored for years to build these glorious textures, and then you get the people that just turn them down. And there's two reasons to turn them down. You turn them down to help performance in some cases. In the early days, and especially the early graphics cards, you would get higher frame rate if you turned them down, so you'd have less latency in your response times. I never came to really great terms with that, where I always thought in the early days of esports and gaming, we did always insist that people have to play with at least plausible resolution. And I tend to be much more optimistic about the state of things today, where the amount of effort that goes into the modern games is extraordinary. Just the detail and all the quality on all the different levels. But there is a little sense of games are so expensive to make now, sometimes in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
For me on the outside, when I look at people making games, like when a game starts building, there's this insane amount of work that has to get done in a relatively short period of time. And I get anxiety thinking about other people making games, and I don't even make games. Like, there's been a few like Duke Nukem, right? For like, it was vaporware for the longest time. People were like, when is this going to come out? Or it was a very hyped up game. Everybody was super excited. It took a long time for it to actually come to development. It was actually a pretty fun game when it came out, but I would get anxiety thinking about this, how much work is involved in these things.
Making games is really, really hard. And kind of an interesting thing seeing the kind of the culture at Facebook, where you've got the big tech titans with the Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, all that. And some of the people that have been in some of the other industries, they do look at it and it's like, oh, they have it so good at these big tech companies, where they really are. Everybody is taken care of incredibly well. They get all the different perks, and and then you look at the game industry, where it doesn't pay as well. There's less job security, and they work you a lot harder. But they have. And it's kind of there is the problem of the fact that when you have an industry, and this has been the way for artists forever, artists and musicians, where if you've got something that people are passionate about and want to be involved in, supply and demand works its way, and you wind up in a situation where, they don't have to be paid as much. But the other side of that is it allows products that otherwise couldn't exist to exist by people working at that level in a way that maybe couldn't be sustained in other industries. There are probably many of the greatest things that were ever made in gaming were only possible by people throwing themselves at that level at it. And there's some serious debate about it. Some people despise that about the industry, that, nobody should work that hard. And there are people that, that think there literally should be laws that should prevent people from working that hard. And I always have to argue against that, where there is a there's a power to obsession and like being able to absolutely obsess over something and throw your life's work, instead of work-life balance, it's your life's work. And everybody will point back. It's like, well, yeah, that worked great for you. You were a founder of a company. You were in a position where you got to make your own decisions. But is that okay to say for the 19-year-old out of a game dev program that's being overworked for it? And I have to always be aware that my view into the industry is very colored by, obviously, my experiences. I never actually worked inside of one of the big EA or Activision studios. And it's possible that they have some valid criticisms, but I still come down on I think it's great when people throw themselves at it beyond the point of what even other people think is reasonable. They have free will. They've chosen to do that. And if that's what they think is going to help them get close to their goals, I'm not going to try to make that impossible for them.
I think what people are concerned about, though, is a company forcing an employee to work massive hours. And that, well, hey, I want to work in video games. I'm very passionate about working in video games, but I want a life. I want to be able to work 8 hours a day, which seems to be a reasonable amount, and then go on about with my life. But you can't really do that if you're in a game development, can you? So
again, my experience isn't the experience of everyone else, but we had Michael Abrash, who was my right hand in the Quake days. He came from Microsoft. And he had a family. He had a wife and daughter, and he would work a reasonably normal schedule most of the time. But he was awesome. So, of course, we were happy to have him. It's not like anybody was browbeating Michael. It's like, oh, why aren't you staying past midnight with us here? Everybody was aware of his contribution and value. Now, that may not be the case in some of the companies today, but I suspect that if all of a person's peers know that they're doing spectacular work and they say, I'm out of here at 5, if they're actually doing valuable work, I don't find it that credible that the companies are going to get rid of people doing great work just because they're not spending 60 hours a week there.
But do they give you a requirement? Like you're required to work 12 hours a day? Is that reasonable? Does that happen?
So, no, I've never... Again, I'm not involved in the HR departments of all of these companies, but the ones that I have been familiar with or that I've known people doing that, largely they come back and say, these people are choosing to do this. And the rejoinder is it's like, oh, it's a toxic culture that makes people want to choose to do that. But I definitely don't buy into that sort of social engineering level of things. It's like if they're doing it, they agree that they'll wave the flag and say, I am doing this because I care so much about this. I don't think that's a problem.
This is a message to anyone out there who is a gamer, artist, programmer, or dev. It's up to you to hold people accountable and stand up for what is right. Don't let the bullies of the gaming industry push you around. Don't give in to fear and intimidation from your supervisors. Don't let the industry fall into the shackles of corporate greed. Don't be just a bystander. Speak up. If you are just a bystander, then you are no better than the bully. Stay strong, my fellow gamers. Together we will win. And as always, remember to go above and beyond the call. My name is Nate, and I will see you next time.